Thank you, members. Now we invite our branch chairman, C.A.K. Murugesan, for his welcome address.
Thank you, Sindil. Good evening, members. On behalf of Management Committee of Tirupur branch of SARC of ICI, I welcome our today's speaker, CA Subhasini Ganapathy Madam, Chennai. Welcome you, Madam, for this wonderful CPE meeting. And also I welcome the members for this CPE meeting on husband of charitable and private trust. Welcome you, members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, today we are having CA Subhasini Ganapathy with us. She is founder partner of Subhasini and Associates LLP. Completed the course of international taxation offered by our CA Institute. Also completed the course on forensic audit. She is specialist in tax consulting, direct, indirect, and international taxation. She addressed CA in many forums in international taxation, tax-related topics, and accredited faculty for GST by ICI, and also a motivational speaker to the students community. Madam is an accredited faculty by Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, Ministry of Skill Development, Tamil Nadu Government, and ICT Academy. She is also a faculty member in DTRPI, training the income tax officers and officials of the income tax department. Also trained the GST officers on various topics. Madam is a co-opted member of the research committee of the Southern India Regional Council of ICAI. She was a co-opted member of SICAS of the ICAI and also committee member of the Society of Auditors, Mylapore. She is regular guest lecturer in many of the colleges in contemporary topics. She started an initiative with the support of YouTube channel Redpix 24/7, educating the general public, creating an awareness on the basis of the Income Tax Act, and now GST for common man, the procedures, preliminary do's and don'ts. The viewership has crossed more than 5 lakhs. Madam has addressed more than 15,000 students as a part of career counseling program of SARC of ICA and Tamil Nadu government. So besides professional interest, Madam is a best outgoing student both in college and school level. She is a national player in Kho state level athlete. She is lyricist for a devotional album sung by Maganadi Sobana and briefing by Solvendra Sugi Sivam. Madam backed a lot of credits at state level competitions in classical dance and participant in various talk shows. So with these great words, I request today's speaker, CA Subhasini, to address our members on the topic. Please, Madam.
And my sincere thanks to the chairman of the Tirupur branch of SARC of ICI for this wonderful opportunity. Tirupur branch per se, like it's more like a family, more than a branch that way. So it is my deemed privilege indeed to address the gathering on the topic of trusts, charitable trusts, both public, private, and religious, non-religious, at this auspicious day. So moving on to the topic. So why there is so much of noise around the trusts these days? Probably like our finance minister brought in, objectives. Yeah. So financial inclusions, overall economic development, etc., was the mantra for the development of the nation. And obviously, when the nation's development is at stake, the government cannot really do all that is needed for the public, be it education, be it skill development, be it nutrition, be it definition is so wide, and obviously the government cannot really do all that activities to protect the people, maybe the monuments, the culture, maybe the health, etc. So that is why government is actually co-opting the charitable institutions, the non-profit organizations who are working selflessly. That's how a charitable institution should ideally be. So who contribute selflessly for the benefit of the general public. And the country as a large. So given this situation, when these non-profit organizations, so we'll come into the kind of discipline a little later. Now I just term them as non-profit organizations. So coming to the non-profit organizations, the benefit which the government gives because of the contribution, the selfless contribution of all these non-profit organizations to the development of the general public and to the nation as a whole is the tax exemption. So keeping aside the approvals, the internal management, the amendments, the operations of all these organizations, the icing, probably the attraction of the charitable organizations, the non-profit organizations per se, is the tax exemption which they enjoy, provided, of course, it doesn't come free. It doesn't come with a blanket kind of approval. It comes with conditions. So provided we fulfill all these conditions, we are eligible for income tax exemption. So that is actually the icing or cream, the attraction for any charitable organizations. Now, given the data analysis, when analyzing the data, the big data in terms of the ITR 7, in terms of the FCRA returns, in terms of the funds coming into the country through various banks, of course, now it is all channelized through the New Delhi branch of State Bank of India, the various branches, etc. There is a complete mismatch between the money which is flowing in, the returns which are filed, the amount which is accumulated, the income which is disclosed, and the benefit which is actually flowing to the general public. So when we look at the benefits per se, when the ITR 7 specifically was analyzed, the government discovered that the income disclosed, the income accumulated, etc. There is a complete mismatch, and of course the money with the banks. And in terms of the AAR, which comes from the banks in terms of foreign contribution, and the FCRA returns, again, there was a mismatch. Now, how are we going to tag all these? Because non-profit organizations are such a big portion of the country. So there is so many organizations. So is that a requirement that I should be a registered organization to do some charity? Answer is certainly no. So you can still do your charitable activity out of your tax paid funds without anticipating any kind of income tax exemptions. Charity is definitely allowed, no questions asked. So there are organized, unorganized, completely organized, completely unorganized, and different kinds of segments which actually form part of this charitable unit or the non-profit unit. Now, how is the government really going to segregate or organize all this? So society, when we take society as a whole, the government tried to pick data again from the society's registration. The government did not get proper data per se of the charitable organizations who are in the form of societies registered under the Societies Act. The reasons being the returns were manual and the data entry could be incorrect. And there were so many organizations who have not filed their returns for years, and they still exist. They still exist with a lot of properties, etc., with or without filing the income tax returns. So to plug in all this mismatch, this task actually seemed to be a kind of Herculean task for the government. So the government brought in a kind of, instead of push mechanism, instead of the government going to each and everybody to check whether, hey, you're compliant, have you filed all your returns, are you complying with all other laws, have you applied your income properly, is there a deviation in your objective clause, have you informed the commissioner about the changes in your trust, etc., is just not impossible. So what the government did is, it made it very, very simple. It said, if you think you are compliant, if you think you have complied with all other laws, if you think you can comply with all other laws in future, if you think your trustees are genuine, they don't derive benefits out of the trust property, you come to us. So we will give you re-registration. We will monitor you for 5 years. then we will get forward. So this is the background behind the regulation which is brought in. And of course, with all the extended due dates, we are still struggling with the new website which is coming. So this is probably the background of why the regulation came in. Now, what is the regulation? So coming to what, there are different kinds of organizations. So when we talk about different kinds of organizations, who all can constitute a charitable organization? Charitable organizations could be anything. So it could be even an individual who's doing charity out of his own pocket. He is still doing charity, but will he be qualified to get the donations or the definition of charity and a non-profit organization for the benefit under section 11 to 13? The answer is no. So you need to be an organization, a registered organization, to enjoy the income tax benefit. So who all can actually enjoy the income tax benefit? A society which is registered under the Societies Act, a trust which is again registered under the Trust Act, and a company, section 25 and now section 8, company registered under the Companies Act. So what are the differences in the case of society, in the case of trust, or in the case of company? In terms of registration, the Societies Act, the registration is mandatory. In the case of trust, it is mandatory in the case of trust under the Trust Act with the registrar. And there are cases where trusts are unregistered and are still eligible to get exemption under section 12AB. And in case of companies, you don't have a choice. You will have to get yourself registered. In terms of operations, is there any difference between a society, a trust, and a company? The answer is a clear no. So there is absolutely no difference or restrictions in terms of a society operating in terms of religious or charitable or a combination of both, or in terms of running some business activity ancillary to the objectives of the trust. It is free to do so. And the same is applicable for a trust and also a company which is incorporated under the Companies Act. What about the compliance? So the society has to do its annual returns, file its form, the management committee, the list of members, the financials, the audited numbers to the registrar of societies under the Societies Act. Trust per se, thanks to the Tamil Nadu bill, which did not turn into a reality. Otherwise, we would have had compliances. As of today, touch wood, we don't have any kind of annual compliances as far as a trust is concerned. And as far as a company is concerned, there are, of course, ROC filing, which is draconian, where the penalty meter starts running immediately on any kind of non-compliances. So this is in terms of the annual compliance. Is there any kind of restrictions in terms of the memberships or the trustees per se? There is absolutely no restrictions. In terms of a foreigner, non-resident, foreign citizen becoming a member of any of these organizations doing charity in India, there may be issues in terms of the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, but as far as section 11 to 13 is concerned, there is absolutely no problem. So in terms of registration, compliance, operations, in terms of restrictions on membership, etc., all the institutions in whatever form it may be, all the charitable organizations stand in par. So maybe they enjoy a benefit, or edge over the others in terms of being a company, so that their recognition is higher and you are easily eligible for a CSR activity, etc. And nothing that a society or a trust is not eligible for a CSR activity, provided you have proper track record. The rules do approve any kind of organizations as eligible for CSR activity, but company per se is a kind of regulated entity, at least it up. governance in the organization, everything. In terms of a company, there is definitely a kind of better status that people enjoy. And in terms of all these organizations, in terms of all these setup, there is no big difference when it comes to the Income Tax Act. So when the Tamil Nadu regulation bill came, of course, there were lots of speculations as to whether we should shift the head office to some other state, to that extent. But fortunately, that did not come. So today we don't have that amount of difficulty. So coming to the registration, the re-registration process. So what does that a trust has to do in terms of the re-registration process? So be it a society, be it a trust, be it a company, irrespective of whatever seniority you have, whatever amounts, whatever big projects you till June, September. Now, actually, the due dates are again moved. So we have time for all these re-registration. Now, what happens if I don't do the re-registration? We have section 115 series to actually stand before us to tax the entire leftover proceeds. So that's really draconian. So it's very, very important that every trust which has been operational, irrespective of the form of the society or the trust or the company, everybody has to get themselves re-registered under the Income Tax Act to continue the exemptions which they have been enjoying. So this re-registration, just because I am registered, does that mean I enjoy all the exemptions specified in the Act? The answer is no again. Because what is important is registration is only a kind of license, a passport for you to avail the exemptions. So what is actually the ticket to avail the exemptions is the fulfillment of the conditions, or in other words, non-violation of the provisions which are mentioned. So in terms of section 13, there should not be any kind of violation of the provisions. So fulfillment of the conditions and non-violation of the terms or the regulations, the framework within which a trust has to operate is actually the key for availing the exemption. So just because we have an exemption, that doesn't mean that we can thoroughly enjoy all the exemptions available under the Income Tax Act. So this re-register process, when we talk about, the re-registration process is applicable to everybody, irrespective of whatever form, however old, whatever bigger project you have handled. So this re-registration process, we will have to do a re-registration with the compliance of all the laws. Now, compliance of all the laws again brings in a different kind of perspective. So there was a recent amendment where the Commissioner of Income Tax or the principal CIT has to satisfy himself about the compliance of all laws by a trust before it could give an approval. So it was practically impossible for a Commissioner of Income Tax to check whether you are compliant with all other laws. So now again, the mechanism is to allot a unique registration number, which will be tagged with your FCRA, which will be tagged with the PAN and other, thanks to Niti Aayog, the registrations which we do for the trustees, which is not actually prescribed under the FCRA Act. But of course, unless you do that registration, you cannot get your foreign funds. So all that is linked so that the monitoring mechanism is absolutely intact. So any kind of non-violation, any kind of violation of any of the provisions of any of the acts, then you are your registration is possibly, probably like your registration might be cancelled. So this is the kind of mechanism to implement the vision the government had earlier, with the intention that they had brought in the amendment that the compliance under all other laws is important. Now, trust, of Of course, the charitable activity is important. The public utility is important. Now, why all this compliance with all other laws? So when the government is giving exemption under a charitable trust, a charitable organization, so where you enjoy not paying tax subject to fulfillment of conditions, so the government expects you, or there is absolutely zero tolerance towards any kind of non-compliance. This is probably true with any other law or any other regulation which the government is slowly bringing in. Of course, I mean, even with the worth of digressing for a minute, the 1 and 3B GST or 1 and 3B, which the government has brought in now. So there is zero tolerance towards any kind of non-compliance. India being a kind of developing country, it follows the OECD model for its development. And the mantra of OECD is make compliance easy and make non-compliance very, very difficult. The intention of the government is definitely appreciated, but we as chartered accountant, we may not thoroughly agree that the compliance is made very, very easy, especially with the income tax website. Of course, it is setting, or it is setting itself now. Probably like we'll see the light in a few weeks, months, days. Let's keep our fingers crossed. So here, in terms of compliance with all other laws is important, and that is where there is so much of detail which is asked when you are doing your re-registration. So the form, when you file, the form 10A, which you file for re-registration, there's only one single form where you file for your 12AB and all your other exemptions which you enjoy under Income Tax Act. So when we file the forms, we submit all the data, including the trust deed. So what is important in terms of the trust deed? There are so many case laws in terms of amendment of trust deeds where your registration or your eligibility cannot be cancelled just because your objectives are changed. Your eligibility cannot be cancelled just because the trustees have changed. Your eligibility for ATG cannot be cancelled just because of the name is changed and which is not, there is no prior approval from the CIT. So there are n number of case laws in terms of changing the amendment of all the clauses. And when there is a amendment deed in place, then the primary deed, the principal deed, along with the amendment deed is to be read together to check the test of eligibility. So in case the primary deed had an objective of maintaining or relief of poor, and this one, the amendment deed contained an objective of promoting yoga. So now, is there a change? There is a change. There is a change in the main objective. But is there a change out of section 215, which defines the public charity? So there is no violation. Probably like yoga is also one other eligible activity for this charitable activity, defined as a charitable activity. Similarly, the relief of poor. So there is definitely a shift from one objective to the other. But will that tantamount to a kind of violation for the trust to lose its eligible exemption? The answer may be no, provided it has received donations informing the donors about the change in objectives. So the donor who has donated to the trust is well informed about the, and he has donated for yoga, and it has been communicated somewhere. It could be in the website, it could be in the receipt elsewhere. Then the trust will not lose its exemption just because there is a change. Now, when we are filing the form for re-registration, all of us have a doubt, like, and especially with the given deadline, so we all had confusions as to what do we do with the amendments. So if we have to go and get the approval from the CIT, is that a workable option? And when we go to them now, the answer we get is everything is shifted to CPC and we cannot approve anything. So you can upload whatever you want. We will peruse the document which is uploaded. So here, are we violating the provisions where we have to get the prior approval, etc.? Probably we'll have to take a call as substance over form, and move ahead with all the support of these case laws, where the primary objective of the trust of doing a charitable activity has not been violated, and all other conditions of the relative not enjoying, and there is no undue influence which is there over the trust, there is no misuse of funds of the trust, etc. The eligibility of exemption should not be denied, and there are like a lot of supporting case laws for that as well. So as far as the re-registration is concerned, the check which we have to do is, in case if we have to do some changes in the amendment deed, etc., this probably is the right time to make all the changes in the deed and then go in for the approval. So once we go in for the approval, in case if you are not able to get any kind of specific approval, these are kind of practical solutions where you can just communicate that in a letter that you had given this intimation to it, get a Tapal acknowledgement and attach that as a part of your filing your Form 10A, so that you are absolutely safe that you have communicated, because except for the change which is relating to the main objects, all other things are voluntary. So any other change, any other minor change in terms of a trustee's demise, a change in the trustee, change in the registered office, change in the name, etc., are kind of voluntary intimations, except for the objectives of the trust, which is very critical, which is important for the office of the commissioner to examine or to re-examine the eligibility of the exemption. So in terms of all other minor amendments, it is okay to actually intimate through Tapal and attach that Tapal as part of your 10A filing, so that you have done your duty right. So once we apply for this re-registration, the registration comes in and our registration is valid for 5 years. I'm sure like all of you would have attended n number of seminars and lectures on this. For worth of repetition, I'll just give the gist of this re-registration process. I'll just take not more than 10 minutes on this. So this re-registration is valid for 5 years. And when do we re-register? Renew the application at the end of 6 months. The last 6 months, we will have to go in for renewal of that particular registration. This applies to your section 12A, 12AA, wherever you were in your erstwhile, to get your 12AB registration now. This equally applies to section 80G. So it is only the clauses which we have to select carefully when we are filing our Form 10A. All other than that, the documents, supporting documents, etc., are all self-explanatory. So there were questions that is it okay to file Form 10A once for 12AB and 80G together? The answer is no. The same form, same content, but we'll have to file it twice for each section. So this registration for existing trusts who are thoroughly enjoying the section exemptions under section 12A, 12AA, and section 80G, they will continue to enjoy, provided they re-register, they will continue to enjoy the exemption for a period of 5 years. So they will have to go in for this re-registration at the end of 4.5 years. The last 6 months, they will have to go in for re-registration. And for all the new registrants, so in case we have applied for registration prior to March 2021, and of course, like there is 6 months time for us to get the registration, and we haven't got any kind of communication from the department, then should we re-register? The answer is no, because your file will automatically get transferred and your primary registration itself will be under this 12AB instead of 12A. Though you had applied for registration under 12A, your registration will be under section 12AB. Practically, now there may be questions as to there is no communication. I am not sure whether my old forms are moved into new registration, etc. So for all the existing registrations, probably the registrations have already come. We can check with the department. Unless it is specifically rejected, we can wait maybe till December, another a couple of months, then it is worthwhile to give one more application in terms of that, and there is very less probability that both will get approved. So that would be the practical solution given the scenario of all the site glitches. So, and any trust which is getting a new registration, a fresh registration will be valid for 3 years. And they will have to go in for re-registration at the end of 2.5 years, the last 6 months, or the time when they actually start the activity of the trust, whichever is earlier. So in the earlier regime, we had a lot of issues as to the bank account. 12A will ask for bank account, and when we go for the bank, they will ask for 12A registration. It was always a chicken or egg story. So here they have made it very, very clear. Commencement of activity is definitely not a precondition for availing the exemption. So you can apply for the registration. You will get the registration. You can start your activity. In case if you wish to change your provisional registration to permanent registration, you can do so immediately on commencement of activity. So in case if you don't commence your activity for the first 3 years, in the last the last 6 months, you can do your ATG as well. Now coming to the 1023C, which is very critical here. So till now, people were enjoying exemptions under section 12A, 12AA and 1023C. Henceforth, that may not be possible, or that is not possible. You will have to choose which route you want to take. So we have to choose whether we are taking the 12A route or the 1023C route, because both the exemptions are not available together. So here, understand which is better, either the 1020. It is important we need to know the which is more beneficial in terms of the exemptions. Is my internet connection stable? Am I audible?
Yes, madam.
Okay, because I keep getting a message that my internet connection is not stable. I'm audible, right? There's no problem.
Yes, madam. But in between that, time it's not properly come.
Okay, sir. In the point, actually, clear varling, sir. I'll repeat.
கொஞ்சம் கட் ஆகுது பேசிட்டு இருக்கும்போது.
Okay, sir.
So அது maybe internet unstable இருக்கிறதுனால அந்த மாதிரி
I'm getting a message that it is unstable. So if there's any point that specifically I should repeat, ninga solunga sir. Otherwise,
okay, madam.
One second, I'll just change my Wi-Fi. So in terms of the differences between section 1023C and LA, when we decide like which is better, of course, there is no one single answer for any kind of questions, and especially when it comes to the charitable trust. Here, probably the solution actually leans more towards 1023C, basically because except for one big disadvantage where section 12A, of course, there is no plain supportive, but still there is a room that you can get your registration retrospective for all the funds which you actually received. But for in terms of the compliance, everywhere 1023C seems to be much better in terms of the earlier the limit was 1 crore, now it is increased to 5 crores. So in case if there is a there is an organization within the 1023C 4 to 6 in terms of the university, in terms of any kind of religious activity or other than that, which is funded by the government, which falls within the clause 1, 2, 3 of section 1023C. There are situations where 1023C actually stands a kind of ahead of section 12A. In terms of the applicability, in terms of application, because section 12A is only a kind of passport to enjoy the exemption, whereas 1023C is an approval and it is not so stringent. So in case if you violate any of the provisions, then they have the powers to actually cancel. So it is not so stringent in terms of the 1023C. In terms of re-registration, approval, in terms of maintenance of accounts, in terms of eligibility, in section 1023C, there are only 3 conditions where you will have to account, you have to apply 85% of your funds, you have to file your returns on time, and you have to invest the funds duly under the prescribed investments. So in terms of 12A, probably it is the same, but any kind of violation in terms of section 13 or section 11, your eligibility is supposed to be cancelled. Registration is actually much higher, or the probability is much higher. So the period of validity, of course, is going to be 5 years for both 1023C and section 12A. So in general, when we look at the applicability of the sections, the stringency of the provisions, 1023C seems a little better, except for the cases where we had received a lot of donations, but we haven't applied, or probably like we complied with those things, but we don't have a proper kind of approval, where 12A could be a kind of retrospective effect, where 1023C, there is no such provision. So to choose between 12A and 1023C, we will have to choose, because hereafter, henceforth, we don't have the option of enjoying both. So there is a very, very stringent decision which we have to take, very important decision, considering the past and the future of the organization, whether we will have to go with 1023C exemption or we'll have to stick to 12AB. So in terms of registration, it will be valid for 5 years. We'll have to go in for re-registration at the last 6 months. In terms of new registration, the registration will be valid for 3 years, and we will have to go in for re-registration in terms of the last 6 months, or the commencement of activity, whichever is earlier. In terms of compliances of all other laws, it is very, very important that every trust has to comply with all other laws, be it GST, be it PF, be it gratuity, be it FCRA. Every single or act, we need, just a minute. Okay, so I think it is clear now. So this is important. Now coming to the trust between the public utility and the private trusts. So what becomes the bigger difference? So when we look at a kind of few case laws which says that it is managed by a private trust, the act, the Indian Trust Act 1882 is actually brought in to regulate the private trusts. So when we talk about private trust, it's a kind of, a private property which is held for the benefit of a closely held people, but a private trust could also be of charitable nature, but a charitable trust cannot be of private nature. So the vice versa is definitely not possible. Private trust could be of charitable nature, where the restrictions of the trust, the access to the assets of the trust, or access to the management of the trust could still be private. So just because the management is not open to the general public, the assets are not accessible as in utility per se should be there, open for the public at large. but the access, the decision making, probably the management of the trust is definitely not open in the case of private trust. But still, if it is a private trust which is extending services of general public utility, it will and it can, it is eligible for section. So when it comes to a private trust, the test, of course, like a private trust, a property, it has to be legal in nature. A person should be competent to enter into contract to be a trustee. There should not be any ulterior motive, and the decisions made should be completely in the interest of the trust. It should be according to the objectives of the trust. In terms of undue influence or undue benefits which is taken out of the trust, then all that is not doable. So trust is a trust at the end of the day. But a private trust and a public charitable trust, the major test here will be the utility, the advancement of public utility will be the actual test underlying the exemptions which is available under the Income Tax Act. So there are, in the case of Ganeshi Devi and Rami Devi charity, this is 71 ITR 696, there was a temple which was built, and it was managed by a private people, a kind of family temple, which was open to the general public for darshan and puja, and all access was given to the open public without any restrictions of caste, creed, etc. So here the exemptions was definitely allowed, despite this being a private trust managed by private people, because the utility was advanced to the public at large. Vice versa, the other way around, in the case of CIT, this is Vigabas Maheshwari Seva Samiti. This is 220 CTR 368. The trust was, of course, formed. This is also a kind of temple and a kind of utility which was open to the public, but it said some kind of privileges, some kind of special privileges or special access was allowed to the community, the Maheshwari community, the people who belong to the Maheshwari community. Hence, the exemption under the Income Tax Act was denied. So the test which we have to bring in terms of the private trust and the public trust is, a private trust could be eligible for all these exemptions, despite the fact that the private trust is managed and managed by a kind of family or family trusts. But the advancement of general public utility, so it is falling within the definition of section 215, where it is giving benefits to the general public utility, be it maintenance of archaeological importance or relief of poor or any other utility which is the seventh limb of the section 215, the eligibility will definitely be there. So just because a trust is a private trust, it need not be denied of the exemption, provided we should be able to prove that the private trust, though formed, though will be managed by private people, the benefit is applicable or available to the public at large. So this is probably the difference or the major point which we may have to clarify in terms of the public trust and a private trust. So even if it is a public charitable trust, the benefits, if it does not really flow into the general public at large, if it is restricted to any kind of specific people, except for those which are allowed. So a public charitable trust cannot be formed for a specific set of people, except where it is formed for the benefit of upliftment of the scheduled caste or scheduled tribe, or upliftment of women or children. So except for these four categories, if a public charitable trust is formed for the benefit of a sect of people, then there is every possibility that there may be a denial of exemption of under the Income Tax Act. So it is important. What is important? The test which we have to bring in here is actually the utility which is advanced to the public at large, and not the form of the trust. It could be a society, it could be a public trust, it could be a private trust, it could be a company which is formed under Section 8 or erstwhile. So the underlying factor, the underlying test which is important to enjoy the exemption under the Income Tax Act is only the advancement of utility to the general public. So what happens to the limb which when we are drafting the deed, we might put in yeah. So coming to the exemption, so I really don't know where I got dropped off. But basically, suddenly I realized that this dropped. So can I just start from 1023C exemption differences? Can I get some responses, please? Sir?
Madam, yes, madam.
Sir, எங்க drop off ஆனது சார் 1023C நான் ஆக்சுவலா பேசிட்டு அந்த ரியலைஸே பண்ணல சார் கட் ஆஃப் ஆனது.
ஓகே ஓகேங்க.
1023C differences-ல இருந்து ஸ்டார்ட் பண்ணவா?
ஸ்டார்ட் பண்ணலாம்.
Okay. So this is a kind of major decision which we have to take in terms of the 1023C or section 12A. When we have to make a decision as to either or, then we'll have to outweigh the advantages and disadvantages of taking approval under section 1023C or going under section 12AB. Though in terms of the voluntary donation, in terms of the application of income, in terms of accumulation, the things are almost same, except in the case of 12AB, we have some extra compliances of filing form 9A, etc. for accumulation points. In terms of the corpus donation, investments, the time limit validity, the registration, everything is almost same in terms of section 12AB and section 1023C. But why do we say 1023C is slightly definitely better than going in for exemption under section 12AB? Of course, this is not a kind of blanket solution, but given the kind of stringent provisions, because earlier the powers of the CIT was given through the rules. Now the power of CIT is directly defined in the Act itself. So given the risk of non-compliance, given the risk of the effects of non-compliance in terms of as far as 1023C is concerned, it is very, very simple that you have to actually file your returns, invest the funds in the prescribed modes and apply 85% of your income. So in terms of section 12A, there are a lot of other violation. Any small violation under section 13 would trigger and shackle your exemption. So given that discrepancy, it is better to lean towards 1023C where there is a choice between 12AB and 1023C, subject to one single aspect where under section 12A, in case if there is any income which you've been enjoying all through and you without any exemption under section Income Tax Act under any other section, section 12AB, if you get, there is a probability with the support of all these circulars, case laws, etc., that it could be retrospective. But section 1023C can never be retrospective. It will only be prospective. So the points which we have to consider when selecting section 12AB or section 1023C is the amount of donations, or in terms of eligibility, in terms of registration, everything is going to be the same. In terms of the violation, the probability of violation. So I was talking about a private trust enjoying a public charitable nature because the trust is managed by people who are closely knit, maybe a family, but still the utility or the objective of the trust is advancement of, it's open for the general public in terms of the charitable nature. It falls within the definition of section 215. Then in those cases, the probability of violation under section 13 is slightly higher. There are case laws where the car was purchased in the name of the trustee. So the entire amount was disallowed. So, and later the car was actually legally transferred into the entity name, where they said, okay, fine, there was a violation that it was registered under the trustee name, but it was legally repaired. It was set aright. Hence, the exemption may be allowed. And in terms of the availing the depreciation on the assets which you treated as application. So that is actually a critical problem where we when we buy some asset, we treat that as application. We take that 85% benefit out of that asset, and we also claim depreciation. So it becomes a kind of double benefit out of the same amount which is applied. So all that is similar between 12AB and 1023C. In the case of private trust or a closely related trust, there are probabilities for violation under section 13. Does that mean that if I go under section 1023C, I can do anything I want? I can draw any amount of remuneration. I can enjoy all the benefits which are available into my pocket? The answer is no. You will have to definitely judiciously apply the monies for the specified objectives. So drawing benefits for private utility is definitely not allowed under section 1023C. Having said that, a small violation, would it really trigger a small non-compliance? Would it really trigger? Then the answer is no. 1023C is much safer. So the points which we have to consider is, one, the previous donation. It cannot be retrospective. Section 1023C cannot be retrospective, but section 12AB could be retrospective, and the probability for violation and non-compliance. So of course, we all think that we all have to be compliant all through, and nobody's intention is to be non-compliant, but the probability. So we know the nature of the trustees, we know the operations of the trust, we know how the trust operates. Given all those criteria in mind, probably like we'll have to make a choice between section 12AB and section 1023C or otherwise. So, but for this, whether it is section 1023C or section 35, all the trusts have to get themselves re-registered. Registration will be valid for 5 years, and that is called as permanent registration. During this period, it is a kind of test period for each and every organization, whether we are maintaining the accounts right, whether we are getting the audit report right, and whether we are filing our returns on time. And when we are talking about filing the returns on time, again, there is a dispute or different interpretations, whether trust has to follow section 139 strictly, or even a belated return would tantamount to compliance. Of course, section 139 is definitely there, but there are supporting case laws where you have complied with all other conditions. Just because you have filed your returns belatedly, that may not be the criteria for denial of exemption. So given all these conditions, the 5-year period is a kind of monitoring test period as to how we are going to check. And there is one other additional point which I want to make here. When the CIT is actually approving the trust in terms of section 12A or ATG or 1023C or 1046, whatever, when he or she is approving, they have absolute powers to check your objectives, whether your objectives are in line with the trust, whether your objectives are eligible for the exemptions which the Income Tax Act provides for, etc. But in terms of the explanations of the donations which are received to you, the powers are limited. So as far as the 5-year term is concerned, we need to be very clear on maintaining accounts filing the returns for donations, and make sure that there is absolutely non-violation of any of the rules prescribed, because a registration is only a passport, an entry ticket for claiming the exemption. The actual test for eligibility comes in compliance of all the conditions prescribed, and the do's and don'ts, if I can put it that way simply. So the do's and don'ts under the relevant sections. So unless we comply with the relevant do's and don'ts, we may not be eligible for the exemption which are allowed. And there are so many cases, and we ourselves would have seen so many notices which are coming up even for the past years, where the entire amount is treated as income and a lot of tax is levied on all this. Of course, there are room for interpretations and a lot of things open for appeals as well. So when coming to section 13 to be specific, in terms of the religious trusts, so what if a charitable trust has some kind of religious nature into it? Is that allowed? It is actually allowed, provided the religious percentage is not more than 5%. So the total contribution which a trust received, let's say like it is a kind of temple. Now these days it is a kind of trend that every organization does. So it could be a religious nature, it could be Hindu, Christian, Muslim, or whatever religion. So they have a small amount of religion into it, and a lot of charity. So there could be a hospital, there could be a school, there could be a skill development, there could be an old age home, and also a temple inside. So there's definitely some amount of money which is going into the temple for puja, abhishekam, or in terms of other religions, the respective things which are purely religious in nature. So here section 13(1)(a) says, just because there is a tinge of religion into it, the denial of exemption is not probably like it is not reasonable. So there can be a small amount of religion into every charity. So there were like a lot of case laws where they said like if propagating a religion is definitely not charity and other things, and there are case laws otherwise too. So the amount of money which is actually spent on religious activity should not exceed 5%. And in terms of the charitable activity, in terms of the business, the conditions, when we are into the core, the first 6 limbs of section 215, then the business activities can be a little more. But when we move into the 7th limb, any other public utility, we have the restriction of 20%. So your business income cannot exceed 20% of your gross. So earlier it was 25 lakhs, where the amount, it was felt like it is completely unreasonable to give 25 lakhs for a small trust and also to a big trust. So it is important that the 20% limit is followed properly. In terms of the first 5 limbs, the business should be ancillary to the core objectives of the charitable nature. It cannot deviate from the main objectives. But what if there is a big profits that year? So what if that year, one particular year, there has been a lot of business income more than the charitable income? The exemption may be disallowed for that particular year, and the entire exemption may not be taken away. In this, there are n number of case laws in terms of the educational institutions and the hospitals in this lines. So when they make a profit of say 20%, 30%, etc., then definitely the objective is more business in nature. The Supreme Court has actually said, if nothing stops from them from making a margin, a surplus of 10 to 15%, but if they are making anything more than that, then the objective is not of charitable nature, it is something else. So the profit percentage, the surplus which an entity is making, be it though the objectives are more of religious, charitable nature, be it educational or medicine, that way, despite the fact that it is doing charity, it is definitely allowed to collect fees. It is definitely allowed to accumulate its funds. It is definitely allowed to plow back its funds and deploy it again. It is definitely allowed to purchase properties, take loans, etc., etc. Everything is allowed. It is definitely allowed to make surplus also. But the surplus should not exceed a reasonable limit. So in the specific judgment of the Supreme Court, they said like the profit percentage cannot be more than 10 to 15%. If it's more than, like if it is around 30%, then the nature actually differs, despite the fact it actually passes through all other tests and conditions. So coming back to section 13(1)(a), just because there is a religious tint, it cannot be said that it is not eligible for any exemption. It is definitely eligible, but only for that portion which is applied for this religious nature, then that will be disallowed. In terms of section 13(1)(b), we already discussed any trust which is formed has to be for general public utility. So in terms of general public utility, when we say it should not be for any specific caste, creed, etc., it should be for the public at large. It should be for the people in India. It should not, any particular person should not be denied of this exemption. So except for the fact that there are 4 areas where the trust can be formed for a specific sect of people, which is women, the tribes, the scheduled tribes, the scheduled castes, and children. So if a trust is formed exclusively for women upliftment, then it is allowed. There again, there should not be bifurcation between a women of this particular sect or this particular place or so and so. And in terms of the places also, there are so many other case laws that says just because a charitable trust is formed genuinely, maybe a village development project is undertaken, and there is definitely public charitable utility which is formed, which is not restricted to, but unsaid to that that particular charitable activity is available to that area. So it cannot be construed as it is being formed only for that particular geographical area and others are restricted. Though the fact may be obvious that the people from other areas may not enjoy the utility, but still it is a public charitable nature. So just because it is restricted, it will not deny the exemption available under the Income Tax Act. So except for these 4 categories, women, tribes, scheduled castes, and children, there cannot be any charitable trust which restricts itself for the, as far as the utility is concerned. It should be for the general public utility as defined, the charitable nature as defined under section 215. Section 13(1)(c), it cannot be for any kind of specified persons. So when we're talking about private trust, if the private trust utility is talking about the benefit to any kind of specified person, then that is a violation and your exemption will suspend. I mean, you cannot continue your exemption under the Income Tax Act. And as far as section 13(1)(d) is concerned, if you are investing the funds, the surplus funds or corpus funds, other than the modes prescribed under section 11(5), then your exemption is disallowed. You will be violating section 13. Section 13(7), anonymous donation. Despite the fact that we are going to apply the anonymous donation into the public charitable nature, the utility, the fact that it is an anonymous donation, it has to fall under the specified category, and it cannot be a kind of donation which is formed, which is along with the other due donations. And section 13(8), if it is a business income is greater than 20%. So in terms of the CIT exemptions, this is Mumbai Metropolitan Regional Development Authority. The exemption was cancelled on the ground that the business income was greater than 20%. So given all other facts that the objectives of the trust were correct, the trust was formed for a purpose and it was happening, the activities were running according to the objectives of the trust. There was no violation of the management trustees in terms of any other activities mentioned in section 13, and all other conditions in section 11 were also fulfilled. This cannot be the only criteria for cancellation of the registration, is what it is said. So section 13 read with the business, read with section 215. So provided section 215 is duly judiciously followed, then section 13.8 really cannot violate it. So section 13.9, accumulation benefit will not be allowed if the returns are not filed. So let's say like I filed a form 9A in terms of accumulating the benefits for future years for a specified purpose. I have received the proper permission and I'm accumulating the funds. So what if I don't file my return duly? The benefit is denied. So this is where we said going to section 12AB is very simple, and the very fact that trusts really claim that I have a 12A exemption, I have a ATG exemption. The very fact that you have exemption does not mean that you will enjoy all the privileges or the exemptions given under the Income Tax Act. So what is important is we will have to fulfill all the conditions which are given. We should not violate any of the regulations which are prescribed for the trust to continue to enjoy the trust. So when we're talking about the specified persons, as far as 12A B is concerned, the trust deed itself should contain that the fact that all the benefits should go to the people of India. So what if some portion of the funds are transferred outside India for the same objective? It could be for upliftment of poor. Maybe some amount was utilized for relief of poor in Africa. So is that allowed? So here again, when we do a difference between section 12AB and section 1023C, there is no specific restrictions under section 1023C as far as application of income outside the country is concerned. But as far as 12AB is concerned, it is very, very particular that you will have to apply the income properly within the borders of India. So within the borders of India. Moving on to ATG. ATG exemption is one such activity where everybody wants ATG exemption. So section 12A is one such step, initial step where we get the registration, and section ATG is where the donor gets the benefit. So as far as ATG is concerned, the source of donation. So when the donation is given, the source of donation is important, and it is important for the person who is giving the donation. And from the trust angle, so what we have to look at now that we will have to file a form 10BD and give a certificate under section 10BE for all the donations which we receive. And there are restrictions in terms of the cash donations which we are receiving, that cash donations cannot be more than 2,000 rupees in cash. So it should be in electronic mode other than cash mode only. So in the case of Rajeshri Sailendra Narayana Banjadiyu, which is CIT 36 ITR 94, the source of donation probably is not important from the trust angle. So when we are giving a receipt under section ATG, let's say like a trust is receiving 1 lakh rupees or 1 crore rupees in cash as donation. From the trust side, there is no restriction to accept cash. So of course, there are other side effects which might come for this cash donation accepted. But per se, the donation given more than 2,000 rupees, that the check there is, the checkpoint there is, the person who is giving the donation will not be eligible for the exemption. So for the, as far as the ATG exemption is concerned, the person who is giving the donation, let's say like he's giving 1 crore in cash. So he should not expect an exemption of 50 lakhs in his GTI for the donation given. And as far as the trust is concerned, the point which I'm trying to drive here is, trust should not give a receipt stating that I have received this in cash and you are eligible for exemption under section ATG. No. The exemption under section ATG will be, will be available only for the amounts, monies which are received by the trust other than in cash mode for any money exceeding rupees 2,000. So anything more than 2,000 which is received in cash, the trust should make sure or ensure that it gives receipt only for 2,000 rupees and nothing more. So all other donations will not be eligible for deductions there. And in terms of exempt income, let's say like a person is enjoying agricultural income or any other exempt income, the same 14A concept applies. So you cannot enjoy this benefit under section 80G out of the exempt income. And the source of donation in the case of Rajashri Sailendra Narayana Banjadiyo, which is CIT, the 361 ITR, which I was talking about. The person had agricultural income and non-agricultural income. He did give a donation and he had claimed the entire donation there. So there could be some portion of donation which had come out of his agricultural income, where he had actually enjoyed the donation. But the case was actually in favor of him. The department said it's okay, you cannot really bifurcate out of which funds he had actually given. This is more so like our section 56, where you need not actually prove that this particular fund was borrowed to invest in this particular investment to claim that interest. So the same logic here, the source of source need not be questioned as far as the 80G is concerned. And the trust under 80G, again, whether a religious trust can enjoy a 80G exemption. The answer is yes, but provided, we already discussed, the religious portion should not exceed 5%. So it should be within the limit of 5%. You can have your charitable activities for 95% and 5% can be religious. If it is exceeding the 5%, then that particular portion will not be eligible for section 80G. And if you are contributing for any temple which is for any national importance, which falls under that archaeological category, then your 80G exemption is intact. You can continue to enjoy the exemptions under 80G. And we will have to, the validity, just because 85% of the income is not applied, section 80G exemption will not be denied. And let us look at some practical issues where now this from 1/4/2021, all the 80G is suspended. So unless the person applies for a fresh re-registration and gets it approved, he cannot enjoy, the trust cannot enjoy the 80G exemptions. This on one side, where the government on the other side promotes that, you know, the COVID situation, like all the trusts had to contribute to the development, I mean, or to the survival per se. In terms of the CSR activities also it was approved. But even to file the CSR1 form, we had to give the 12A and 80G registration. So that apart, what happens to the donations which were given until the date of re-registration, until the date of approval? So until the date of approval, if there are donations which are given and if the trust gets a re-registration done, re-registration approved without any big violations, then it is safe to assume that all the donations which were given are eligible for 80G. In case if the registration is cancelled or not available, or due to some violations, there were instances where the previous year assessments were also taken and the 80G was cancelled. What happens to the fate of the donors who gave donations to the trust, believing that there is a 80G exemption? So the 80G exemptions will not be denied on the fact that the 80G exemption was cancelled after, you know, during assessment, etc. And this is also supported by various cases and more so by logic. This is probably like we can extend the logic of our TDS. So earlier the government said, okay, somebody has deducted your TDS, not paid, I am not worried, you have to pay the TDS. And later they brought in a circular clarification like you have to pay tax only once. So in case if I already paid 30% out of my salary and you expect me to pay one more 30%, then it's like double taxation on the same income. The same logic applies here. If a person has actually believed that a trust has a 80G exemption and it has donated based on that belief then he or she will not be denied of the donation, the benefit of ATG out of the donation made to this particular trust. So as far as the company is concerned, is there a restriction in terms of the nexus of the business? So when we are talking about section 37, there has to be a nexus, a connection between the expenditure claimed and the business. As far as ATG is concerned, except for CSR activity where a CSR committee has to approve and it has to align with the objectives of the CSR, the nexus need not be proved. And of course, the constitution of the trust or the registration per se will not validate. So if it is invalidated, still the donor is actually protected. Now, the donations which are received actually should be filed in Form 10BD, and it of course will come in Form 26AS, basis which the donor can take the exemption. So gone are those days where we pick some number approval from the websites of the trusts which are eligible under section ATG, and we just put some number to enjoy the exemption. So we cannot do that anymore. And the case law which I was referring to in terms of the effect of the donors. So now that I have given a donation believing that the trust has a ATG exemption, but later the ATG exemptions was cancelled, maybe due to 263 revision or something, then my donation basis which I gave on good faith, basis of good faith, will still be valid. Ramdas Maneklal Gandhi versus Union of India is the case law which I was referring to. And the power of the CIT in terms of analyzing the facts of the objectives of the trust, maybe the activities of the trust, maybe your past history, the past events which you have undertaken, maybe the KYC of the trustees, which is becoming very, very important these days. So everything can be analyzed and checked at the time of giving the registration. So post the registration, in terms of the donations given, the power of the CIT is not so wide enough to check why you have received this donation from this person and all that. So that is actually given in Kalyanam Karoti versus CIT. So here the power of CIT is not to get into the facts of the donation as to why I have received the donations, the explanation regarding the donations received by the trust. So to sum up section ATG here, so the ATG exemption has to be re-registered like any other section, section 12AB or section 1023C or section 1046. ATG also has to, we have to go in for re-registration, and this re-registration will be valid for 5-year period. During the 5-year period, the trust has to ensure that it is filing the return of donations which it is receiving, and the content of the form is very, very clear. So gone are those days where we actually compute and finally we see something is not available, put it in the corpus, etc. Now the donations, when they are receiving itself, they will have to give information of the donor, address of the donor, PAN number of the donor, the mode of receipt of the donation, be it cash, check, draft, NEFT, whatever, and the purpose of donation, whether it is for corpus or whether it is for any specific fund, or whether it is a general donation. So, or the purpose of the donation also has to be filed there, and this will be auto-populated for the other person to get an exemption. So it is very important that the application of funds is planned properly, or due exemptions is applied prior to it. And of course, just because a trust does not apply 85% of its income, the ATG exemption will not be denied. And any exemption, any donation which is received more than 2,000 rupees in cash, the receipt has to be given only for 2,000 rupees, because a trust is giving a receipt that they are eligible for ATG exemption, giving all the registration approval number, etc. So the trust has to be careful that it should not give any receipt more than the amount which is eligible, and the eligibility comes only in terms of the cash In terms of other money, there is no question of eligibility. And now this brings in another point. What happens to the donations which are bought in kind? So as far as the ones which are accounted in kind, when in terms of the religious trust, so when there is a gift which is given to a particular person in kind, so in terms of religious trust, that will not be treated as a trust property itself. So when let's say like this is actually given, religious offerings are not the properties of the trust, is the proceedings, I mean the judicial pronouncement which is given in the case of Swami Narsingh Giri versus CIT 179 ITR 554. So here it says that the religious offerings are more out of bhakti. So if I can put it that way, it is not for the sake of donation. It is not for advancement of any charitable nature. So that will not be construed as a trust property. But does that actually stop a religious trust from doing charitable activity? No, that is clearly spelled out in the case of CIT versus Dawoodi Bohra Jamaat. So there can be religious tinge in a public charitable trust. There can be propagating a religion, etc. But still, if there is a charitable nature, that is definitely allowed. Now we were talking about the donations which are received in kind. So when we are receiving the donations in kind, am I eligible for a ATG exemption? Let's say like I am giving a land for building a something like orphanage or old age home or whatever. Am I eligible for ATG exemption? The answer is no. The ATG exemptions are available only for the monies which are flowing into the trust. So what is actually given as cash for 2,000 rupees limit, and anything in the digital cash, it could be check, it could be credit cards, it could be NEFT, anything other than cash. So all those things are eligible for ATG exemption. So how much ever cash we receive, the trust has to be careful to give donation only to the extent of 2,000 rupees and nothing more than that. And just because there is a religious activity, it will not be denied from ATG exemption. Just because there is a business activity more than 20%, it will not be denied from ATG exemption. And just because it has not applied its 85%, it will not be denied from ATG exemption. But giving all this comfort is only in the case of exemptions, exceptional situations. So the exemptions are allowed only when you follow all the rules and regulations which are prescribed under the relevant section. So to sum up this, the charitable trust, the regulations, then we'll quickly move on to FCRA and a few in the CSR. So I would like to just summarize the facts whatever we've been discussing for the last 1.5 hours. So as far as the charitable trust is concerned, the idea is to regulate the charitable trust. So if it is a trust formed without an instrument, so in that case, you can prove that the trust was in existence with the help of land records or any other records, with the help of the notarized document to ensure that the trust really existed. And this is important in terms of section 80G. In 80G, there has to be, the trust has to be a registered institution. In terms of 12A, the existence, if it is proved, then that is sufficient. In terms of ATG, we need to be very careful that it has to be a registration. In terms of 12A, if it is a trust which is formed through some oral trust, or somebody started some trust, he put in some money, and that has been running for long, and there's absolutely no clue as to what document is there, whether we have maintained accounts, etc. Nothing stops you from still going in for section 12AB exemption. And it can be a registered trust under section, it can be a registered institution, an entity under the Societies Act, or it can be a registered entity under the Trust Act, or it can be a company. So whichever entity form it follows, it will still be eligible for exemption under the Income Tax Act, provided it fulfills all other conditions. So when we say that all other conditions and compliance under all other laws, if you are now going to register a society which has not filed annual returns for years, then it is important that we have to first repair that before going into this, because compliance under all other laws is one such condition. So now, I mean, Institute is also proposing, and many other organizations have actually requested for amnesty scheme under the Societies Act, so that there is minimal penalty and we are able to regularize our returns that way. So compliance under all other laws becomes important. And in terms of the KYC of the trustees, it is very, very critical, especially in terms of the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. If you are a registered trust under FCRA, and this re-registration is mandatory irrespective of the fact that you have been enjoying registration for years. And this re-registration, if you already have an existing registration, you will be allotted a permanent registration which will be valid for 5 years, where we'll have to go in for renewal at the last 6 months. If you are not an entity who is enjoying Section 12A or 12AA exemption or Section 80G exemption or any other exemptions under any other sections, then your eligibility will be provisional registration for 3 years, and you will have to go in for re-registration at the end of 6 months. If you feel that you have started the activity, you want to shift from provisional to permanent earlier than the expiry of 2.5 years, you are still eligible to do so by filing the form for permanent registration. So any change, any conversion from permanent, provisional to permanent, etc., has to be filed through the Commissioner CIT, Commissioner of Income Tax, and any amendment in the trust deed. It is time for us to revisit the amendments to check whether there is a change in the address, change in the objects, change in the trustees, change in the maybe any other clauses, change in the management, change in the powers of the trustees, or activities, whatever it may be. Before going in for re-registration, it is time to revisit the entire deed. Amendment deeds can be done with the permission of CIT in the case of change in the main objectives of the trust, and intimation to the CIT in terms of any other changes, voluntary disclosure, and then we can go in for application. And this 2.5 years period, the provisional registration per se, the activities, the commencement of activities of the trust is definitely not a precondition for going for this registration. And maintenance of accounts, filing of returns on time, getting the books of accounts audited. If the income of the entity, be it society, trust, or company, of course, like you will have to get the accounts audited irrespective of the income. So the major difference here is for a society, of course, like we'll have to now they are asking for 10B per se, and this probably is a kind of leeway or a room or a kind of comfort which the trust has, which a trust is registered under the Trust Act, where the audit is applicable only when there is a income exceeding the basic exemption limit. So other than that, we will anyway be doing the audit for the society and the Companies Act and all the filings under the relevant laws. So compliance, annual compliance is also mandatory to ensure that the registration under the Income Tax Act is intact. So the amendment which is not, which was not brought in recently, which is already there, is compliance under all other laws, which is very, very critical, which has to be read in law and in spirit to follow, be it GST, be it PF, be it gratuity, be it any other labor law, it could be any other permission under pollution control or whatever. So compliance under all other laws is very, very important. So permanent registration for 5 years, renewal in the last 6 months, provisional registration for 3 years, renewal in the last 6 months, conversion from provisional to permanent anytime you start the activity. And any other compliance under all other laws is important. Filing the return of income on time becomes very, very critical, and the compliance by the trustees in terms of all other conditions prescribed under section 11, etc., becomes very, very important. Otherwise, the basic exemption under the Income Tax Act may not be available all through the 5 years. So they have the right to revoke the registration at any point in time where we are violating. It could be the objectives, it could be the business, it could be section 13 or any violation. Then it is important that we follow all the regulations. And the major decision which we have to make is the choice between section 12AB and section 1023C in terms of the respective organizations where it is applicable. So we'll have to choose in terms of the long-term perspective, except for the fact that the retrospective advantage is there in section 12AB, which is not available in section 1023C. All other points are favorable in terms of 1023C. This is definitely not a conclusion, but probably a kind of leaning towards 1023C when compared to 12AB, where the stringent provisions are very, very stringent. As far as 1023C is concerned, the only restrictions are utilization of funds, the filing of returns, and investments. So as far as these three conditions and of course the objectives are followed, there are no other big stringent rules in terms of 1023C as compared to section 12AB. So these are, and of course under ATG, we need to be careful when we are accepting the donations, giving the receipt, and going in for the applications. Make sure we get the approval, provided you have been receiving donations. And just because the approval is rejected, it does not mean that there will be a retrospective effect on the donors. So the donors are definitely safe, provided they have given the donations on good faith, etc. And as far as the public trust and the private trust is concerned, private trust is still eligible for exemption, provided the utility, the objective of the private trust is to extend probably the objectives is for general public utility or the charitable nature as defined in section 215. So all this will not really restrict a trust, provided probably, to put it in a summary, whether it is application of funds or whether it is acceptance of donations or whether it is section 13 or whether it is the investments or whether it is application of funds, or whatever the conditions which we were discussing, whether it is filing of return of income, the underlying fact is always substance over form. So as far as the charitable institution is concerned, as I started in the introduction, the very idea of the government to give all this exemption to these charitable organizations is to ensure that there is holistic development, there is a whole economic development, inclusive development of the entire nation. So once that substance is fulfilled, all other rules and regulations are definitely stringent. I mean, I would not say that we can violate anything and still say like substance over form and walk away. But the underlying fact is, if a trust is operating genuinely with due intentions, following the objectives and the major clauses which are prescribed, there should not be any denial of exemptions under the Income Tax Act. It can continue to enjoy all the exemptions. So as far as ATG is concerned, we need to be very strict when we are giving a receipt for the donors. So this is sum and substance here. Before I move on to FCRA, can we have the questions, if any, until this? Can we make it a little interactive? So if there's any questions in terms of renewal, registration, amendment of trust, etc., we can take it now, and then we can move forward to the FCRA amendments. So it's a, can I assume it is very clear? எல்லாருக்கும் clear-ஆ புரிஞ்சுதா இல்ல எதுவுமே புரியலையா? I'll be happy to answer questions, clarifications. If it's more interactive, it will definitely be more interesting. It will be thought-provoking also. Okay, so can I assume there are no questions?
One question, madam.
Yes, sir.
In case of any requirement for amendment in the trust deed,
Yes,
after
sir.
we got the registration, so is there any specific requirement to get the approval, madam?
So that is exactly where I was telling. So when there is a change in the objectives of the trust, so let's say like if the allied objectives, so let's say like some home was there, or educational institution was there, and now that objective of the trust is extended to skill development, then there is no big change in the objective of the trust. But in case if your objective was originally to do women empowerment, and now you are shifting it to yoga, then there is a complete shift in the objective of the trust. So then if there is a change in the objective of the trust, it is important to get approval approval from the CIT. If there is any other changes, any other amendments in terms of change in address, change in powers of trustees, maybe the trustees are not alive at all. In most of the cases we see that. So some trust was started and it was just running, just that the managing trustee or none of the people, maybe hardly like one person may be spared. So many of the people are no more, actually the generations have gone, but the trust is actually running. So in all those cases, the amendments can be done for safer sake, because we have given a declaration when we got our approval under ATG 12A or 12AA earlier. We have there will be a condition that we will inform the CIT for any other changes in the deed. So just for safety sake, if it is not objectives, so objectives marna, definitely it is better to get the permission. So objectives illama, if there is any other changes in the trust deed, you can actually submit a copy of the amended deed, get a acknowledgement from the Tapal section, so that you have actually intimated it to the department, and enclose that acknowledgement also when you are filing the 10A form, sir. So that will give us sufficient proof that we have taken initiative to intimate it to the department. So if objectives marna mattum enna panna mudiyum, do we have sufficient time avanga approval koduthu நம்ம பண்றதுக்கு அப்படினாக்கா இப்போ இருக்கு, இதுக்கு முன்னாடி நம்ம கிட்ட அவ்வளவு டைம் இருக்கல. So அந்த மாதிரி இருக்கும்போது இப்போ if you have sufficient time, நீங்க தாராளமா you can go and prove. So as far as the activities is concerned, if you are going in for ATG approval, உங்களோட objectives totally change ஆயிருக்கு, யோகாவா மாறி இருக்கு அப்படினாக்கா you can substantiate your activities with proofs. இப்போ நீங்க யோகா ரிலேட்டடா இவ்ளோ activities பண்ணிருக்கீங்க, இவ்ளோ வந்து camps conduct பண்ணிருக்கீங்க, whatever. So அந்த மாதிரி activities ஓட substantiate பண்ணி you will have to prove that it is still eligible for the test. So on the section 215 la சொல்லப்படுற the charitable activities குள்ள தான் நான் சேஞ்ச் பண்ண ஆப்ஜெக்டிவும் இருக்கு அப்படிங்கறது நம்ம ப்ரூவ் பண்ணிட்டா வேற ப்ராப்ளம் இல்லை சார்.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the question, sir. Any other questions?
இன்னொரு क्वेश्चन மேடம், சாரி.
சொல்லுங்க ப்ளீஸ்.
இப்போ அவங்க அதே charitable trust which was formed for the object of yoga and other promotion, இப்போ வந்து they are getting into medical shop, that is also for the benefit of the public with a discounted rate கொடுக்கறாங்க.
சரி சார்.
இப்போ அது நம்ம will it be considered as a commercial activity or
So இப்போ யோகா வந்து ஆக்சுவலி முன்னாடி யோகா வந்து இந்த செக்ஷன் 215ல அந்த கடைசி லிம்ப்ல இருந்தது, ஆஃப் எனி அதர் ஜெனரல் பப்ளிக் யூட்டிலிட்டி. சோ ஸ்பெசிபிக்கா இருந்த அந்த 6ல இல்ல. இப்போ வந்து யோகாவையும் மேல கொண்டு வந்துட்டாங்க, ஏன்னா அதோட இம்பார்ட்டன்ஸ் வந்து நம்ம வந்து பண்ணறதுக்காக. சோ அது மேல வந்ததுக்கான ஒரு அட்வான்டேஜ் என்னன்னா, அதோட அலைட் பிசினஸ் ஆக்டிவிட்டீஸ்ல இருக்கிற கான்ட்ரிபியூஷன்ல ரெஸ்ட்ரிக்ஷன் இல்ல. சோ அந்த 20% நான் சொல்லிட்டு இருக்கும்போது இட் கேன் பி மோர் தென் தட் ஆல்சோ. இப்ப நீங்க பார்மசூட்டிக்கல் இது வந்து சொன்னீங்க அப்படின்னாக்கா யோகா ரிலேட்டடா ஏதாவது ஆயுர்வேதிக் ஆயில் கொடுக்குறாங்க அந்த மாதிரி மெடிசனா இருந்தா ஓகே. அலோபதி மெடிசன் கொடுக்குறாங்க அப்படின்னாக்கா இதுவும் அதுவும் ஜெல் ஆகாது இல்லைங்களா சார்? சோ யோகா வந்து மோர் ஆஃப் நேச்சுரோபதி, இந்த மெடிசன் அலோபதி மெடிசன் கிட்ட போக கூடாது அப்படிங்கிறதுக்கு தான் யோகா.
ஓகே ஓகே.
சோ அதுவும் இதுவும் அலைன் ஆகாது. இன்கேஸ் அவங்க வந்து ஹாஸ்பிட்டல் கண்டக்ட் பண்றாங்க, அது அவங்களோட பிரைமரி அப்ஜெக்டிவ். அந்த ஹாஸ்பிட்டல்ல அவங்க யோகாவும் சொல்லி தராங்க, அங்க அவங்க மெடிக்கல் ஷாப் வச்சிருக்காங்கன்னா இது ஒர்க் ஆகும் சார்.
ஓகே ஓகே.
சோ அந்த மெயின் அப்ஜெக்டிவ் வந்து மெயின் அப்ஜெக்டிவோட அலைன் ஆகி இந்த பிசினஸ் ஆக்டிவிட்டி வரணும்.
சப்போஸ் இப்ப அது அலைன் ஆகல அப்படின்னா இது கமர்ஷியல் இது பிசினஸ்க்கு தனியா புக்ஸ் ஆஃப் அக்கவுண்ட்ஸ் மெயின்டைன் பண்ணி நம்ம தனியா
கரெக்ட் சார். இல்ல அது அலைன் ஆனாலுமே அந்த கண்டிஷன் வந்து இருக்கு, நம்ம அதுக்கு தனியா புக்ஸ் மெயின்டைன் பண்ணணும். அப்பதானே அதுல இருந்து எவ்வளவு கான்ட்ரிபியூஷன் வருங்கிறது தெரியும். புக்ஸ் ஆஃப் அக்கவுண்ட்ஸ் மெயின்டைன் பண்றது எனிவே அந்த கண்டிஷன் இருக்கு. சோ இப்ப யோகாவும் மெடிக்கல் ஷாப்பும் வச்சிருக்காங்கன்னா இட் பி லைக் இதோட அலைன் ஆகாத ஒரு பிசினஸ் ஆக்டிவிட்டியா போயிடுது இல்லையா? சோ அப்ப அதுல இருந்து என்ன கான்ட்ரிபியூஷன் வருது, உங்களுக்கு எலிஜிபிலிட்டி இருக்கா இல்லையா, அப்ரூவலே கொடுக்கணுமா வேணாமா, அந்த மாதிரி ஆயிடும்.
ஓகே ஓகே. தேங்க்ஸ்.
ஓகே சார், ப்ளஷர் சார்.
Madam, I have one doubt, madam.
Yes sir, please.
Madam, trust வந்து have a immovable property.
சரிங்க சார்.
Want to sell the property. Any approval from court, madam?
Of course sir. கண்டிப்பாக, நிச்சயமாக எந்த சேஞ்ச் இருந்தாலும் இப்ப நீங்க ப்ராப்பர்ட்டிஸ் இஃப் யூ ஆர் willing to sell, இப்போ ஒரு ட்ரஸ்ட்ல இருக்கிற ப்ராப்பர்ட்டியை நம்ம வந்து விற்க போறோம் அப்படின்னாக்கா நம்ம வந்து பெட்டர் இன்டிமேட் பண்ணிட்டு அதுக்கப்புறமா நம்ம பண்ணணும். அதுக்கப்புறம் நம்ம டிஸ்க்ளோஷர், கேபிட்டல் கெயின்ஸ் அதெல்லாம் வந்து தனியா வரும். பட் நீங்க அந்த ட்ரஸ்டோட ப்ராப்பர்ட்டியை செல் பண்ண போறீங்க அப்படின்னாக்கா இன்டிமேஷன் டெஃபினட்டா இம்பார்ட்டன்ட்.
அப்படி பண்ணா
அது வந்து ஆர்ம்ஸ் லென்த்ல பண்றீங்க அப்படிங்கிறதுக்கான ஒரு ப்ரூஃப், நம்மளுக்கு ஒரு சேஃப்டி.
இப்ப அப்படி பண்ணாம பண்ணிட்டா என்ன கான்சிக்வென்ஸ் மேடம்?
பண்ணாம பண்ணிருந்தீங்கன்னா நீங்க என்ன பண்ணிருக்கீங்கன்றத பொறுத்து கான்சிக்வென்ஸ் வரும் சார்.
இல்ல அதான் இம்மூவபிள் ப்ராப்பர்ட்டி சேல் பண்ணிட்டாங்க,
இம்மூவபிள் ப்ராப்பர்ட்டி சேல் பண்ணிட்டாங்க. ஓகே, அந்த இம்மூவபிள் ப்ராப்பர்ட்டி சேல் பண்ணி ப்ரொசீட்ஸ் என்ன பண்ணாங்க?
ஓகே ஓகே ஓகே.
இப்போ அந்த இம்மூவபிள் ப்ராப்பர்ட்டியை பொறுத்த வரைக்கும் அவங்க என்னைக்காவது ஒரு நாள் அந்த டொனேஷன்ல 85% அப்ளிகேஷனா இந்த இம்மூவபிள் ப்ராப்பர்ட்டியை ட்ரீட் பண்ணிருப்பாங்க. சோ இப்போ இத திருப்பியும் எடுத்துட்டு வந்து இவங்க அந்த அப்ரூவல்ல ப்ராப்பரா காமிச்சு இந்த தடவை 85% அப்ரூவல் அப்ளிகேஷன் வந்துச்சா, வரலைன்னா அதுக்கான கான்சிக்வென்சஸ் இருக்கும். இப்போ ஒரு திருப்பூர்லயே ஒரு மெயின் ஏரியால இருக்கிற ப்ராப்பர்ட்டி, ரயில்வே ஸ்டேஷன் பக்கத்துல ஒரு 100 கோடி ரூபாய் போற ப்ராப்பர்ட்டின்னு வச்சுக்கோங்க. இன்னைக்கு வந்து ட்ரஸ்ட்ல சேல் பண்றாங்க, அவங்களோட சொந்த ட்ரஸ்டிக்கே வந்து வித்திருக்காங்க அது 1 கோடி ரூபாய்க்கு அப்படின்னாக்கா அப்ப அதுக்கு தகுந்த மாதிரி வேற கான்சிக்வென்சஸ் வரும். அவங்க என்ன பண்ணிருக்காங்க, அதோட இம்பாக்ட் என்ன, அதேதான் திருப்பி சப்ஸ்டன்ஸ் ஓவர் ஃபார்ம். சோ இப்போ இவங்க ஜெனுவினா ஒரு ப்ராப்பர்ட்டியை சேல் பண்ணிட்டு ஒரு ஸ்கூல் நடத்துறாங்க, 2 இங்க இடத்துல வந்து கொஞ்சம் எக்ஸ்பான்ஷனுக்காக பணம் தேவைப்பட்டது, வேற எங்கேயோ சம்பந்தம் இல்லாம ஒரு நிலம் இருந்தது, அது வித்துட்டு இங்க வந்து அவங்க அப்ளை பண்ணிருக்காங்க அப்படின்னாக்கா ப்ராப்ளம் இல்ல. அந்த அப்ளிகேஷனையும் அவங்க ரிசீவ் பண்ணிருப்பாங்க, இந்த தடவை இவங்க இந்த இன்கமும் அப்ளை பண்ணிருப்பாங்க. இன்கேஸ் இது கன்ஸ்ட்ரக்ஷன் ஏதாவது லேட் ஆகும்னா ப்ராப்பரா அந்த ஃபார்ம் 9 எல்லாம் ஃபைல் பண்ணிருந்தாங்கன்னா ப்ராப்ளம் இல்ல. சோ என்ன பண்ணிருக்காங்கன்றது பொறுத்து தான் பனிஷ்மென்ட்.
ஓகே, थैंक यू மேடம், थैंक यू. மெம்பர்ஸ் எனி டவுட், அதர் மெம்பர்ஸ்?
அந்த ப்ராப்பர்ட்டில சேர்மன் கேட்டார்ல, அதுலயே இன்னொரு டவுட்டுங்க மேம்.
சொல்லுங்க சார்.
இப்போ ஒரு ப்ராப்பர்ட்டி வந்து இன்னொரு ட்ரஸ்ட்டுக்கு வந்து டொனேட் பண்ணா என்ன இம்பாக்ட்ங்க? ரெண்டுமே ஏடிஜி இருக்கு.
ஓகேங்க சார். இப்போ டொனேட் பண்றது வந்து ஃபர்ஸ்ட் அதுக்கு அலௌடா அப்படிங்கறது நம்ம பார்க்கணும். சோ இப்போ ஏடிஜி இருக்கிற ஒரு ட்ரஸ்ட்டுக்கு நீங்க டொனேட் பண்றது உங்களோட ட்ரஸ்ட் டீட்ல அது வந்து அலௌடா. அண்ட் இந்த என்னங்க சார்? பிரேக் ஆகுதா என் வாய்ஸா?
இப்ப சொல்லுங்க மேம்.
சாரிங்க சார், ஏதோ நடுவுல கேட்காதீங்க.
இல்ல நான் கேட்கலீங்க, வேற ஏதோ பிரேக் ஆச்சு.
ஓ சரிங்க சார். சோ இப்போ இந்த ட்ரஸ்ட் ப்ராப்பர்ட்டியை இன்னொரு ட்ரஸ்ட்டுக்கு டொனேட் பண்றதுக்கு ஃபர்ஸ்ட் அந்த இன்னொரு ட்ரஸ்ட் இந்த ட்ரஸ்டோட அப்ஜெக்டிவ்ஸோட அலைன் ஆயிருக்கா, உங்க ட்ரஸ்ட் டீட் அதை பர்மிட் பண்ணுதா அப்படிங்கறத பார்க்கணும். சோ அதெல்லாம் within the framework இருந்ததுன்னா ஒன்னும் ப்ராப்ளம் இல்லைங்க சார். But again, it should not result in any other personal benefit to anybody.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you for making this interactive actually.
Thanks madam.
So if there are no more questions, we'll move on to FCRA. Okay. So now, just like we have been discussing about the income tax regulations, there are equal amount of regulations under the FCRA Act as well. So when we are talking about the FCRA, again, I draw reference from my point 1 of the introduction. There has been complete mismatch, and there are a lot of funds which are flowing into the country in terms of terrorist activities, in terms of other activities which are detrimental to the interest of the development of the nation. So there was a stringent requirement for bringing in regulations under the FCRA, so that the foreign money which is flowing into the country, which the government, the Ministry of Home Affairs had actually allowed foreign money flowing into the country only because there was requirement. So if there is if there are people from our own country staying abroad, or if there are people abroad who have a lot of respect for our Indian culture, our people, so they want to do something for the development of the country, then it has to correctly go to the development of the particular project. So apart from this, there are other so many malicious activities which are happening, especially similar to our section 13. There are so many other expenditures which are done for the benefits of trustees. So probably even in our clientele, we would have seen a lot of clients enjoying a absolute luxury life out of the funds which are coming for a charitable purpose. Now, the government had to put in regulations everywhere. And this, of course, did not happen with the support of the higher officials in the government, associated with the government. So there is a complete check mechanism in terms of the composition of the trustees, the regulations in the administrative expenses, and the renewal process, etc. So the first and the important thing is, you should not have any person who is connected with the government, who is there in the position of the government as a composition of your trust. So if you have anybody like that in your trust, it's high time you can request them to move out of the trust, because you will lose the registration under FCRA, which is actually very difficult to get. The second condition is, whatever amount we receive as donation. So let's say if we are receiving a $100 donation from a foreign country, the administrative expenses should be restricted to 20%. You cannot spend more than 20% as administrative expenses. Now, what is administrative expenses is the next question. So in case if there is a project, agricultural related research project. So in this case, generally, if there is a expense in terms of boarding and lodging, in terms of travel, we tend to put it as administrative expenses. But in this case, this specific case, if there are expenses for travel, for stay, etc., for food, of course, the researchers have to go out, and that is the expenditure in the project itself. There's not be any other expenditure which will come in. So in this case per se, the amount which is spent on expenses of administrative nature, but for the project. So if the agricultural project is the objective of the trust, then the money spent for the travel, the food, the stay of the person who is doing the research will not be construed as administrative expenses. So the administrative expenses will be pure and pure administrative expenses, nothing related to the project, directly to the project. So நம்மளோட language சொல்லணும்னா direct cost இல்லாம indirect cost இருக்கிறது மட்டும்தான் will be construed as administrative expenses. So this administrative expenses is restricted to 20% upper limit. So to take a practical scenario, if there is a donation which is received from a foreign entity, I mean, in case of a FCRA approved organization, I have not filed my annual returns. So in terms of annual returns, if I fail to file my annual returns, the penalty is 5% of the gross receipts. Believe me, the officers in the Ministry of Home Affairs, they are actually extending this. They are just interpreting this to their advantage to say gross receipts means gross receipts of the trust and not gross receipts from foreign countries. So it is that draconian actually. So if I'm going to pay a penalty of 5% on my gross receipts, where will I account this into? So if I have to pay this penalty of 5%, I will have to obviously pay it from the donations. the trust will not have that amount of source to pay this penalty. So in this case, the restriction of 20% actually will take a big hit. And in terms of the SBI, now the government actually said we will regulate the entire thing. So there will be only one gateway through which any money from the foreign country will flow into India. So the gateway is the New Delhi SBI branch. You will have to have account opened there, and it was like a mela. So and you cannot file your annual returns until you open an account in SBI practically. So any money, any dollar which is flowing into India can flow only through that New Delhi SBI branch. And that branch will of course have a bank charges. And let's say like I have my own bank, maybe Canara Bank in Tirupur, through which I am operating, which is also a designated informed account under utilization account under FCRA. So in this case, I will have to first get the money is in SBI New Delhi branch and transfer that money to Canara Bank and then spend from Canara Bank. There is no restrictions. I repeat, you can have n number of banks. So namakku Canara Bank, Union Bank of India, whatever banks you want to, ivlo banks you namakku account vechikanona dharalama vechikalam. So there is nothing which stops from having a number of banks. Only thing, you will have to inform the FCRA department that I have so many utilization accounts. But the bank charges, if you calculate, and the 20% restriction, if you look at on the other end, it will be a great clash. So as far as the FCRA is concerned, the major amendments are all the monies which are flowing in can flow only through the FCRA New Delhi branch account. The trustee composition, the 20% cap on the administrative expenses, the annual return filing, and now the renewal actually is extended until 31st December. So whoever's renewal was due between 31st September is now extended to 31st December, and they have sent the list notification according to that also. So these are the major restrictions in terms of the FCRA, and giving this unique registration number is actually the key for all these regulations which the government has brought in. The URL will be linked to the Darpan ID or the FCRA registration number, so that the government can track, just like your DIN, the government can track in how many number of trusts you are a trustee, what all activities you are doing, what is the income which you are earning, what is the operations you are doing, etc. So it is very, very closely monitored, and any violation under FCRA Act is very, very costly. So any violation under, I mean, section 11, 12, 13 also is costly. I don't say that it is very easy, but anything in Ministry of Home Affairs is all the more very, very stringent and costly. So if there's any other questions regarding FCRA, probably like we can discuss quickly, and we'll move on to the CSR. So to sum up, the bank account opening is one important point. The composition of trustees is important point. 20% cap on the administrative expenses. Understanding what is administrative expenses is one stringent point in terms of the FCRA, and having the utilization accounts and managing the administrative expenses is something which we have to monitor, advise our clients on, and the renewal under FCRA Act is another important point, along with the annual returns. So these are the important points which I wanted to share in terms of the FCRA Act. If there's any questions we can take, otherwise I'll probably move on to the CSR funds. Is there any questions, any queries, any experiences in FCRA that you want to share? I'm sure like everybody will have a different experience with the Ministry of Home Affairs. Okay, so I assume that there are no questions. So we'll move on to the CSR funds. So the CSR form, the CSR1, which has to be filed to be eligible for the CSR funds. Now, the CSR was one, again, a very, very big scam which was running, where the study said that the application of CSR funds when we look at it, the application in the institution was a percentage. The application by the company itself was a small percentage, and there were a bigger, larger percentage which the government could not track at all. So, and India is the only country where the CSR fund is mandatorily applicable. So every company has to spend on CSR activity. So there has to be a CSR committee comprising of the number of directors prescribed, etc. And that funds has to be deployed within the given period, and the carryover, of course, is allowed. So to do all this, probably the conditions which we have to keep in mind is the objectives of the CSR. So there will be a CSR committee which is formed, and the committee will decide on the objectives of the CSR fund which has to be deployed, and it can be deployed through its own, the company itself, or it can be deployed through a Section 25 or a institution, a trust or a society formed by the company, or it can be deployed through a institution, a charitable institution formed by 2 or 3 companies together. The condition is the last 3 years track record of the institution and the objective of the CSR committee should align with each other. So there should not be discrepancy in terms of the CSR committee. If they say that promoting the education is the objective of the CSR committee, the trust also should have been undertaking activities for the last 3 years in terms of education, promotion of education. It should not be doing anything else like environment protection or something like that, though it is eligible activity under, I mean, it will be qualified for that eligible activity, but the committee's objective and the objective of the trust for the last 3 years track record should align with each other, and it has to present the accounts and publish it in the website. So what is the objective and what is the fund allocated, how they have deployed, what is the trust which they have given, to all this information should be published in the website. And as far as the database is concerned, from where do they pick the database? The CSR1 form is the base. So CSR1 form has to be filed irrespective of the fact that wherever it is. Again, one single measure to regulate it. So societies now they have brought it online, so they will have sufficient data to share it to the government. The companies anyway have data. The trust is one area where it is still not organized. So whether there are registered trusts, there are unregistered trusts, it's still a kind of unorganized, and we don't file our annual returns. So there is one probably a pull to regulate the entire the non-profit organizations together. So wherever institution, whichever institution you belong to, wherever you are registered under, be it Societies Act or be it the Trust Act, you will have to file your Form CSR1, which asks for very, very simple details, and you upload the CSR1. This database is the base for the CSR committee to pick. So this will be based on your seniority, your previous 3 years activity, etc. They will pick and deploy the CSR funds, which is again mandatory. So this is all I wanted to share in terms of the amendments and assessments of the charitable organizations. I'll be happy to clarify any questions or discuss any questions which we may have. And I thank the Tirupur branch for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
For your elaborate discussion. Members, any doubt for FCA? Kindly ask the speaker to clarify.
CSR la da kekkanum illa.
Even trust class. No doubt இல்லையாட்டு இருக்கு மேடம், எல்லாம் நிறைய இல்ல முடிச்சிட்டாங்களாட்டு இருக்கு.
சரிங்க சார்.
Okay, madam. Thank you, madam, for your elaborate discussion on.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, ma'am. And also, I thank the members for the patient listening. Thank you. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all for the patient listening. Thank you.